Hey, deserving listeners, this is part 2 in my reaction to the news story regarding Jordan Peterson and his license potentially being revoked. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. This next video is the Young Turks talking about the story. Someone sent me this video, so let's see what they say.
I am now going to be required, the college can go ahead with this, to put me into a re-education program with their so-called social media experts. And that's also, by the way, a profession that does not exist until I learn my lesson, whatever that is, regardless of how much time that takes.
That's a funny thing to say, that social media expert is a profession that does not exist. Well, there are experts on social media. There are also experts on social media within the psychologist profession. There are things on your resume that probably should be present, like a certain amount of training, experience, maybe publications, that kind of thing. So to say that a social media expert is a profession that doesn't exist. Now, I don't know what the licensing board in Ontario means by social media expert. Like for me, I consider myself to be an expert on the ethics of mental health clinicians using social media, not only because I have 15 years of experience doing it, but I have also spent a lot of time researching the clinical literature regarding ethics in general, not only because I'm a supervisor and a professor and have to oversee a lot of people in their practices and also teach people about ethics. I also supervise supervisors. I train supervisors of clinicians. And so I also spent a lot of time writing a white paper that's available on my website regarding clinicians using social media. I have consulted with a lot of ethics experts. I've consulted with a lot of other clinicians on social media. So I would consider myself, especially when you compare myself to just all the other people in my profession, because there's not a lot of people that know a lot about this because it's fairly new to us, right? So, I would consider myself an expert in that area. Is that considered a profession? No. It's not my job title, for example.
By their judgment, or they can take my license away.
Jordan Peterson is heated and incredibly salty following an Ontario court ruling against the psychologist and conservative media personality. Now, the ruling upholds a regulatory body's order that he takes social media training in the wake of...
Oh, interesting. So that must be why everyone was wanting me to talk about this. So, because I was a bit confused. So the regulating body a number of months ago, maybe 7-8 months ago, said that in order for him to keep his license, he has to go through this social media training. And then there was an appeal to the courts, it sounds like, from Jordan Peterson, and the judge upheld it and said that indeed you do have to go through this training. I would have loved to have seen that hearing to hear the specifics, because this could go a lot of different ways. It could go in a direction where I believe that the government is actually being totally reasonable and saying, look, Jordan Peterson, there's nothing wrong with you speaking your mind about these kinds of things. I might personally disagree with that, the things you're saying, but you have the freedom to advocate for those kinds of issues. But for these kinds of issues, like where you're being bigoted against trans people, that is something that we established long before we even knew who you were. That is something that is unethical and not the standard of care, particularly because you might have trans clients. So it could be something like that. Or if we saw the hearing, we might have seen a judge and the government just not liking Jordan Peterson because they just don't like him and they don't like the things that he says and are coming down on him in a very draconian, unfair way.
Remember, Peterson, who's a professor emeritus with the University of Toronto Psychology Department, was ordered by the College of Psychologists of Ontario to undergo a coaching program on professionalism in public statements. Now, as you can imagine, some of his posts on Twitter have drawn a lot of negative attention, and that was really the...
Okay, so that is more detailed. Professionalism. Yeah, it's hard to know what they mean by that. And that is one of those areas of the standard of practice and of ethics that is really squishy. And I have some negative feelings about even the whole category at times. Of course, professionalism is important to some extent, but it's so interpretable. In fact, I remember So in the ethical codes for the various different mental health professions, there are different categories of ethical considerations. And you have things like client care and confidentiality in the relationship and benefiting the public. And one of them is professionalism. We have an ethical obligation to be professional. Well, what is professional and what is unprofessional? There might be some obvious things, right? But the reason why I have a negative feeling about this whole category is because I remember in graduate school, almost 30 years ago, in one of the books, the authors, and again, this isn't a rule set in stone. Ethical considerations, ethical codes are guidelines, are things that we should be thinking about. There are some hard and fast rules, like don't have sex with a client, but the vast majority of ethical dilemmas that we run into, there's not a clear idea of what we're supposed to do. And even court precedent doesn't really help with this, because one judge might rule this way and one judge might rule another way. So it gets confusing. And on one hand, that can be very distressing to us as clinicians, because we just want to be told what to do. Imagine every time you got in the car, you're like, I'm pretty sure I'm supposed to drive on the right side of the road if you're in the United States. But I've heard people getting in trouble for driving on the right side of the road, so I guess I'll just drive down the middle. I mean, that's an exaggeration, but it kind of is like that in our field. There's not a clear rule about these kinds of things. And the more I have learned over the years, that is definitely a good thing, because every situation is different. Anyway, the point is that in this book that I read, again, that was just written by an author, their opinion, that if you after hours, so you work as a therapist, and then Friday night you go out with your friends and you have some drinks and you appear to be intoxicated. That was identified as unprofessional conduct. It was unethical for that clinician, according to this one author, that they went out with their friends on Friday night. Now, this particularly bothered me because, when I was reading this, I was 25 years old, and I did that kind of stuff. And so I was like, wait, what? I didn't want to be unethical. I wanted to follow the rules, but I'm thinking, so I've been unethical every Friday night since I've been in graduate school? I don't understand. There's a line, right? But where is that line, right? One person might look at another person and say, oh my God, that person is so drunk, and all they're doing is singing karaoke or something, right? Another person could look at them and be like, they don't look that drunk. That seems pretty normal. Where is the line? What's looking intoxicated even mean, right? And what's wrong with a clinician having a life? What's wrong with us doing things with our life? We're supposed to just stay home because we want to avoid any risk of being identified as being unprofessional. What if I went to Home Depot and I was buying a toilet or something, and I made a "that's what she said" joke? Would that be considered unprofessional? It's such a squishy area. So it's not my favorite area of ethics, because I find that it's largely cultural. Now, if the licensing board, and maybe we'll hear, I'm guessing we won't, said, no, we're not talking about some squishy area like being intoxicated on Friday night. We're talking about this tweet in which he is obviously being bigoted against trans people. If they said something like that, I'd be like, oh, okay, well then there's no debate there that's unprofessional.
It's all regarding his online commentary. So I'm going to give you the specific instances that were cited by the board here. The panel.
Oh, great. I should have just waited. So we're going to hear the specific things that Jordan Peterson has done that they considered to be unprofessional.
I should say, the panel noted particular concern with a series of statements that included the following. Referring to Catherine McKenney, an Ottawa city councillor who...
Okay, so there's two examples that were in the last news story by CBC are the identified issues that they're saying, look, this is what we're talking about. Yeah, if that's what the licensing board is talking about, yeah, of course. To refer to Elliot Page's physician as a criminal, even though that physician, in all likelihood, we don't know, but very, very likely that the physician was following the standard of care regarding gender-affirming care, to refer to that physician as criminal, yeah, that's unprofessional. What are you doing? What? There's so many problems. One, being transphobic and bigoted, that's not okay. The government should absolutely step in if you have a clinician who is spouting bigoted statements about a group of people who might end up in his office. yeah, the government should absolutely say, look, this is not okay. You can't be bigoted against a group of Canadians, you know, 'cause he practices in Canada. You can't be bigoted against a whole group of people that might end up in your office. That's not okay. Also, you are promoting bigotry. That is not the standard of care, as far as I know, within the psychological profession. Not only that, but also claiming that a physician is a criminal accusing, I presume, a licensed medical professional of committing a crime. Now, I'm guessing he would say, well, I was just using the word figuratively. Well, then maybe you should go through social media training, because not everyone is going to receive that as a figurative statement, particularly your loyal group of followers that are hanging on your every word. So yeah, absolutely. If this is all that they were talking about, because, you know, you read the story, it's like, oh, the government doesn't like the right-wing Jordan Peterson, so they're trying to make him left-wing or something, trying to make him into a liberal. If this is all that they were talking about, yeah, I would say that they are absolutely in the right, and the judge absolutely should have upheld that for sure. Yeah.
Of actor Elliot Page, stating, and again, I'm quoting him, "Remember when pride was a sin?" And then he used his dead name. Page just had her breasts removed by a criminal physician. Let's go to the next set of examples cited by the panel. A tweet.
Okay, so more examples. A tweet in which he referred to Gerald Butts, the former principal secretary of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, as a prick. That one, so yeah, I don't really know the landscape here, but you know, I'd have to see the exact tweet. But if he is saying, okay, well, this, you know, this official, this government official is a prick, is that considered unprofessional? I think a lot of people would say yes, but I think about for myself. I have said yikes to a lot of people. I've called people jerk faces. I might have even called them fucking assholes at times. I don't know. So I don't know if I've ever said that before, but you know, in that direction, right? Is that unprofessional? Yeah, I think to some people it would be. And maybe I'd agree with that, even looking at myself. But it depends on what you're saying, right? It depends on the point you're making. It depends on the outcome. The Elliot Page one is a slam dunk. It's obvious. There's really no debate there. But this one, the prick one, I don't know. On the other side, how many clinicians, licensed clinicians, have called Jordan Peterson a prick and much worse names? So, you know, I don't know about that one. His tweet in response to a Sports Illustrated swimsuit cover of a plus-size model in which he said, "Sorry, not beautiful." I think I remember this. And no amount of so this is his tweet. Sorry. So there was a Sports Illustrated swimsuit cover of a plus-size model, and he is responding to it saying, "Sorry, not beautiful." And no amount of authoritarian tolerance is going to change that. My God. Jesus. Yeah, he needs training, because look, if you're at home and you have those opinions, you know, it's a free world in that way. You can have those opinions. You cannot, as a licensed clinician, as a licensed mental health clinician, tweet to the entire population of the planet, including possibly some of your plus-size clients, by the way, that, "Sorry, you're disgusting." Yeah, I don't think there's any debate there. And plus, why? What is wrong with you? What point are you trying to make? What's your problem here? Now, I think what his supporters would say is that, no. He's saying that he doesn't like the liberals shoving this agenda down everyone else's throats of, you have to believe that, you know, this or this or this. And it's not the ideas that are the problem. It's the tyranny that's the problem. Okay, if that's your point, whatever, then say that point. But to point to a particular individual, a plus-size model, and say, "You're not beautiful. Sorry, not beautiful." And the only reason why anyone would say, essentially what he's implying is, the only reason why anyone would say you're beautiful is because of tyranny. tyrants are trying to force us to believe that you're beautiful and you're not. I mean, yeah, you need training. And the public deserves to be protected from you. Because remember, this is not a license to speak. This is not a license to tweet. This is a license to treat individuals, to treat possibly people who identify as plus size, possibly trans people. The government is saying, if this is what you're believing and or saying, we do not think you are safe to treat these kinds of people, our citizens who are paying our bills to regulate this profession. And, it's depressing because the little bit that I did pick up on in the news, if you just read the tagline, it does feel like a tyrant coming down on someone for free speech, but that is not what is happening here. It doesn't look like that's what's happening.
A vindictive former client whose complaint about him was a pack of lies. The inquiries, complaints, and reports committee of the College of Psychologists of Ontario found that Dr. Peterson, quote, appeared to be engaging in degrading comments about a former client and making demeaning jokes.
Is it unprofessional? Is it not okay? Yeah, I mean, you could make an argument that it does not only harm that particular client, because the client might hear that and say, wow, that hurts my feelings. There are ethical standards regarding us as clinicians talking about our clients. And it's complicated, but in general, we obviously have to protect the confidentiality of the clients in the vast, vast majority of cases. There are some exceptions to that rule, but most of the time we are expected to not reveal the identity of the clients, including saying anything or revealing anything about the client that could help someone discover who that person is. It's not just not saying the person's name, for example, but if I describe a lot of details about their life, like where they work or this kind of thing, then people could figure out who they are. Another thing is that it's also important that we consider, if the client is hearing us talking about them, that we might even want to obscure even to that client that we're talking about them. Because if we're speaking about them off the cuff on Joe Rogan, we don't want to harm that person. That's our primary mission. That's our prime directive. That is the first thing we should be thinking about, especially when you don't have to, right? That was the principle that I was taught in graduate school, which is that only talk about your clients if it's very important that you do so. If you're just having a conversation, then no, do not talk about your clients. So what would justify talking about your clients? So education is the main reason why we might talk about our past clients to supervisees, to students, and maybe to the public, right? And the other guideline is that when we do talk about our past clients, when we have justification to do so, we want to do everything we can to obscure that person's identity. And there are a few different practices. And this is the practice that I've followed since I've been in social media for 15 years, and I've been a professor for 25 plus years. There are three different practices. One is you literally just get written permission from the client to talk about them. And I've done that before because I've written a book about supervision, and in that book I actually wrote about some clients. And for some of those clients, because the situation was so specific and I didn't want to change anything about it, I actually went to the client and got written permission I sent them the chapter and said, this is exactly what I'm going to say. Is that okay with you? I also have to consider that the client might feel pressured by me to agree to that, even though they don't really want to. And so if I have any reason to believe that that would be the case, I can't even ask them. I just have to not do it. So that's one, is just to ask for permission, of course. Another is to mix things up so much that the client wouldn't even recognize themselves. So you have the gist of the story is true, but there are details thrown in or mixed up such that the client would say, oh, that kind of sounds like me, but it's not me, that kind of thing. So you're fictionalizing the story, right? Another practice is that you literally just make someone up. You can composite a lot of different people together, a composite client from a lot of different experiences. This is a completely made up fictional client. Anyway, so when he talks about a particular client, saying very demeaning things about that client, Yeah. In our field, we're always talking about risk versus benefit. And what's the benefit there? How do you justify taking that risk of harming a particular individual? What's the upside to that? Does it justify? So the question is, does the benefit outweigh the risk for Jordan Peterson as he speaks in a degrading way about a past client who made a complaint against him? I'm guessing the answer to that, is no. The benefit does not outweigh the risk. And thus you need some training. You just need some guidance about if you're going to be a licensed clinician, then you should refrain from doing those kinds of things because it could harm the client and the public.
Stated that referring to the physician who performed Elliot Page's surgery as a criminal was inflammatory and unprofessional. And so after its review, here's what happened. The panel concluded that Peterson's conduct poses moderate risks to the public, which includes the potential of undermining public trust in the profession of psychology.
Now, Jordan Peterson is not alone in these problems. I have seen so many people send me videos of what looks to be licensed clinicians on TikTok in particular who are saying things, in my opinion, that are very, very questionable. Some things that are obviously questionable. So Jordan Peterson is not alone.
However, they also argue that as a member of the college, Peterson is obligated to maintain its professional standards. Peterson, however, said his tweets on subjects like gender dysphoria are based on his informed knowledge and are, in fact, professional to the highest order. And he even denied.
So his notion that gender affirming care for Elliot Page is a criminal act and invalid is, in his opinion, professional on the highest, or not just professional, but professional on the highest order. Yeah. I don't think you're going to find a lot of agreement on that one. So if Jordan Peterson digs his heels in on this, which it seems like he is, then yeah, I'm pretty sure his license is going to be revoked. I mean, when I first heard about this story, I thought, oh, his license is being revoked. And then I read a little bit into it. Oh, his license isn't being revoked. He's just being required to go to a training. No big deal. But then hearing how stubborn he is about it, that, yeah, I think the only answer is that they have to.
Arguing that the opposite is actually true. This is my favorite quote from him. He says, "I think I've done demonstrably more than any psychologist has ever produced to increase the prestige of and trust of the practice of psychology around the world."
My God. I don't know that much about Jordan Peterson. It's hard not to know some things about him given the culture that we live in and also people sending me a lot of his videos and whatnot. And full disclosure, I did listen to his podcast like years and years ago. There were 2 or 3 episodes I listened to at first. It was just lectures about connecting history and the Bible and psychology and well-being. And, you know, if I listened to it again, maybe I'd be a little bit more scrutinizing of it. But I remember liking it in the beginning and thinking, wow, he's making a lot of interesting connections. And, you know, among all the things that I listened to while I'd go on walks in the morning, I wasn't a terrible waste of time. I remember getting to episode 4 or 5 and losing a little bit of interest. I don't remember why exactly. But then, of course, the controversies came out, and then I've learned about him more since then. But anyway, so my impression of him did not include this. I mean, of course, it didn't exclude this, but I didn't realize he was of this sort. Now, I don't know what's going on with his personality, but I will say that someone in his position who would say this to the public, it's one thing to think it or to say it while you've had a couple drinks with friends. It's another thing to type this out on your phone and be like, yep, this is the message I want to put out there. I've done demonstrably more than any psychologist has ever produced in the entire history of the profession to increase the prestige and trust. And not only in Canada or North America, but around the world. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, even if you thought this to be true, of course, there's no way to measure this, but even if you thought this was true, like you think pretty highly of yourself. It's another thing to state it as if it makes sense to. I mean, I who knows? But I would hope that his followers, at least a portion of them, would read this and think, well, come on, Mr. Peterson, I don't think you have to go that far. It's embarrassing. Yikes. So, for some people who go through a particular kind of relational trauma when they're young, they develop a defensive structure that is needed to combat the constant pain that they're going through emotionally, feeling inferior and feeling rejected, feeling worthless. And this defensive structure in their mind and in their behavior is there to suppress that and to distract them from that, to counter it. And not everyone resorts to this defensive structure because, of course, it's something that children develop when they're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years old and is refined as they get older. So how would a 3-year-old know to adopt a certain defensive structure? But apparently it's available to us naturally enough that enough people will exhibit this pattern such that they will resort to believing that they're not only worthy of love and not only worthy of attention because they're not getting enough of that. They're not only worthy, but they're superior. They're better than other people. They're perfect. They're wonderful. They're better than other people, and they're very focused and hypervigilant about keeping on top of that, what we call narcissistic supply. They have to constantly work at it. They're obsessed with it at the expense of, depending on how severe they are, but if they are severe, they'll sacrifice anything. They'll sacrifice their relationships, their happiness. They'll sacrifice even getting to know what they want. A lot of times these individuals, they appear to be chasing what they want, but it isn't actually what they want. They're focused on how things look to others and to themselves. They both want to be seen as superior to others. They want others to, everyone understand I'm superior, I'm the best in the world, and also to themselves because it's abhorrent to them, it's intolerable to them, it's very scary to them when other people do not see them as superior. They don't need to be seen as worthy. They need to be seen as superior because they're trying to counteract. They are overcompensating for the constant voices and messages inside of them that are saying they're worthless, they're worthless, they're worthless. So to drown that out, they have to overshoot it, right? And they have to be very compulsive about and obsessed with making sure that everyone understands that they're superior, because if everyone understands that I'm superior, then I can kind of relax and feel like maybe I'm not worthless. To them, they feel like they're establishing balance by being superior because there's this voice of inferiority that's happening. And if they can match it with superiority, then they feel like, okay, so not only do they have to signal to other people they're superior, but they have to signal to themselves. So they have to reassure themselves in their minds, and by establishing themselves and by holding themselves to certain standards, they get envious of others, because if anyone else is even at their level, according to whatever metric they're following, by the way, then that threatens how they feel about themselves. And then they have to contend with that voice. That voice is saying you're worthless. Look, that person is better than you at that one thing. That means you're worthless. It's not just that one person is better than you and you're still a good person, or that person is better than you, but you're still good at things. It's very black and white. That person's better than you, therefore you're worthless. And they have to establish that they are better than the other person. They, depending on the degree of pathology and their methods, they might just try to compete, or they might actually try to tear the other person down, or they might just tear the other person down in their mind, or whatever. There's various different things that they might do. So that's a thing. And I had not considered that. I'm not diagnosing from afar. It'd be ridiculous, even if this was representative of his personality. It's just hard to know. It's complicated. There's even a world in which he knows this is going to piss off liberals, so he says that as a way of trolling. I don't know, but I just thought I'd point that. We've seen this before in other politicians. This grandiosity, this obsession with needing to be the best. And actually, if for people that I've treated people with this disorder, and it's the general public tends to frame narcissists as like these Machiavellian people that get away with things and are just laughing themselves to sleep every night. No. People that suffer from narcissistic personality disorder, it is one of the most miserable conditions you can ever have because of what I've been talking about, but also because of your defensive structure actually reduces the chance that you will ever get help or ever change because you believe that you're better. You don't need other people's help. You think you're perfect. And to question that is to undermine your entire defensive structure, and therefore you're worthless. So for someone to suggest you go to therapy, or even for the idea to pop into your head, it is terrifying to these individuals. Even when they do find themselves in my office or an office of a therapist that knows what they're doing, or I say that because, not to say that I'm superior, but personality disorders are particular. Each one is very particular. Narcissistic personality disorder is very particular. It's a very particular presentation. It almost never presents in office the way that people talk about it. People with narcissistic personality disorder can be very likable individuals, contrary to what a lot of people on the internet will say. They can exhibit empathy at times. They can exhibit humility at times. It just depends. Not only that, but also it is very challenging. Personality disorders are very challenging anyway, but narcissistic personality disorder carries with it its own challenges as therapists, because a very common countertransference, a very common reaction from a therapist is to feel like you're being shut out by the client, like you don't matter. The conversation will look like a therapy session, but every time you meet with the individual as a therapist, you just get this feeling like you're nothing, actually, like you're worthless, even though it's not being overtly communicated to you that you're worthless. You're just being marginalized and dismissed, but it's subtle. It's a very subtle experience. And if you don't have a lot of supervision and experience and awareness of your own feelings and your own therapy yourself as a therapist, it's very, very easy to conclude that the client doesn't really want therapy or doesn't need therapy. You might even, in a nice way, just raise the question like, so, what do you want to get out of therapy? And then things just kind of fizzle out because the therapist isn't aware of that seduction into that idea that the narcissistic client doesn't need anyone, has it all figured out, that kind of thing. It's complicated, but so my point is that people with this disorder are miserable human beings, and it's very hard for them to recover, given what I'm talking about, in addition to other barriers. So if Jordan Peterson is even somewhat on that spectrum, I feel really bad for him, because it's a lot of suffering, it's a lot of pain, and it's a lot of just constantly on the treadmill of trying to gain some foothold in self-esteem and worth, and never finding it because they're looking for it in all the wrong places. They're looking for it in how they come across to other people, in these ideas of superiority and inferiority and competence, instead of actually finding someone that loves you for who you are, regardless of how competent or incompetent you are. That's what was missing when they were young, and given their defensive structure, they might not ever get it for their entire life. I mean, just think about that because of their traumas early in life, it sets up a defensive structure that creates a massive barrier to them ever getting any kind of real attachment, real connection, real love, real security from anyone. I don't know about Jordan Peterson. The little bit I do know about his family life, it sounds like it's going okay. So I'm going to take a guess and say that that's not the case. But I will say that, there's a spectrum there. So it can create a lot of suffering. Anyway. All right. Well, I think that's probably enough out of me. And everyone, please take care of yourself, because you deserve it. You really, really do.